Hey, hi. I'm Floyd Rosini, the journeyman's son, and welcome back to my shop. Had a busy day today in the shop. Made a couple of batches of wax, some neutral, some light oak. Had a good time. But I'm not here to talk to you about that. I'm really here to talk to you about making a sample and the difference between being a cabinet maker and being a finisher. See, those are two different career choices. You're a cabinet maker, you build cabinets, you prepare them. You actually build them and prepare them to give them to the finisher so that he can use his craft in staining or dyeing the wood or preparing the wood with a decorative coat of paint or a decorative wood finish, and then selecting the proper top coats and then hand rubbing and waxing. Those are the career elements of a wood finisher. The cabinet maker, he has his own job, and his job is to actually build the cabinet. When he builds the cabinet, he makes sure the markings are out of the wood. He makes sure that when the finisher gets it, it's really smooth and it doesn't have any bad sanding marks in it. It doesn't have any swirls in it. And it's pretty much ready for finishing. He'll use a cabinet grade sandpaper, more like a production sandpaper. That's usually like that brown color sandpaper, as opposed to what the finisher will use, which is a finishing sandpaper, and that's the Garnet. The Garnet sandpaper is what the finisher uses. And so as a result of that, the finisher doesn't really need to use a machine. The finisher will sand by hand because the cabinet maker has already done his job. So there's no need to use a machine when you do sanding on the finishing end. And you'll hear about that when we go further into the video, because you'll see in the preparation of the sample how we do that and some of the things that we discuss during preparation of the sample. So I just wanted to get that off the top and get that clear for you so that you knew what I was talking about when we're into the video, okay? So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so before you start any project, before you start a refinishing project or a brand new wood project, you want to make a sample. A sample is so important because you can make all your mistakes on the sample. You can refine your skills on the sample before you actually get to the job itself. It's really important to have a sample. And so you don't necessarily have to have a sample this big. I like to have a sample this big for the purposes of the video. That way you can see everything that I do and you can see how it works on a pretty large surface. When you choose a sample for yourself, I usually recommend one that's maybe about a foot wide and maybe 18 inches long, 2 by 2, something along those lines. A good size sample. You don't want a little tiny sample. It makes a mockery of finishing. You want a nice size sample so that when you're finished with your sample, you have a beautiful job. You have something that you can look at and say, I wrote down all the steps that I took. I followed the procedures, and now I'm going to apply it to my project. And that way on your project, you'll get a perfect finish. You'll get the exact look that you want. Take it out on the sample. You got mistakes to make, let it happen here. If you have confusion and things don't go right, let it happen here. Don't let it happen on your project. So the first thing, when you're selecting a sample board, I like to pick something with some decent grain in it. This happens to be a piece of oak. I got it from Lowe's. It's a 2 foot by 4 foot. So it's going to serve a lot of purposes as I go through the finishing process. In any case, the first thing you want to do is you want to sand this. And I like to sand with a soft block. I don't like to use a hard block, and I don't like to use a machine. I really don't ever use a machine for sanding. You can't have a project too big that it actually needs a sander. When you bring in a sander and you start working with a sander, you're going to get little swirly marks. You just sand it down, sand it down, sand it down. You're going to spend more time sanding to try to get the swirly marks out than if you were to just take the block and do a sanding. It's a much easier, it's a better job, and you don't have to worry that it's not going to come out right. That when you put the stain on, you're going to see all the little swirl marks in it. What a mess. So do yourself a favor, just sand with a block. It makes it so much easier. And I like to use, this is my favorite block. It's a felt block. I'm used to working on antiques, and so when you sand an antique, you really don't want to sand it hard. And when you have an old piece of wood, it has a lot of undulation to it, and you want your block to be able to kind of hit those undulations without being so hard and flat that it goes over the top, and then you get dips, and you sand it down so hard that you're taking the patina away. So I love to use the felt block and by hand. Those are the best ways. Whatever undulation is in the wood, I want it to be there. I want to be able to see that. Now with plywood, you're not going to get that so much, but with solids, you will. And we'll do samples of solids as we go through different videos. But right now, this is the sample we want to use. I love this felt block. If you want something a little harder, you can always use a cork block. Cork block is still a little bit soft, and it'll give you a great job. There are some rubber blocks that are pretty good. I just don't use them. I find the felt block, cork block is about as good as I'm going to get. If I need something to be sanded really flat, I'll use a wood block. But for the purposes of what we're doing today, we're going to use the felt block. And I start with some 120 grit sandpaper. I take the full sheet that's 11 by 9, and I quarter it. And this is one of the quarters. And that way, when I use my felt block, I can get two faces out of the sandpaper. See, I get one, and then when I finish using that one, I can just switch it over. I get a second face. So when you're sanding your sample, you want to make sure that you round the edges. You want to make sure that the corners are not sharp. You want to make sure that those are rounded off as well. You want to make sure your edges are rounded off. You want to make sure this is not sharp and pointy, so that when you start to use your cheesecloth pad to do finishing, you don't want it to stick to that. You don't want it to pull. So I'm going to do some sanding, and we're going to get this thing sanded, and then we're going to stain it. When I block an edge, I come up to it and I sand it across like this, or I'll sand it down like that to break the edge. When I get to the corner, I'll pull it away from the bench just so I can round the whole corner off. You'll see I even go down, I go around like that. Now, if there may be a time when it cuts my paper, that's okay. But now it's nice and rounded and smooth, and that's great. And when you come to these side edges, you do the same as the front edge. You just take it like that, just to break that edge. You want to make sure that you don't have a sharp edge. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time later on as you're doing staining and as you're doing your finishing. You can wear a pair of gloves if you like, because it can get pretty dusty. And there are times when I'll just put on a pair of gloves and not have to get all the dust in my hand. I prefer to use gloves, but today I forgot to put them on. Make sure you round those corners off. It's so important. Get that edge rounded off. I'm going to break that so it's not sharp, no rough edges. Really nice. I always do the edges first, then I do the top. That's great. Now I'm going to change this paper, and I'm going to get a fresh piece for the top. Now, this is important because you're going to be finishing this, and what you want is a perfect finish. We want a great finish. So when you're sanding, now you're gonna end up short stroking. These are short strokes so that you can catch the edge and make sure you get it nice and smooth. So this is a short stroke. You want any Mars that might be on it? See, these are short strokes, and this is fun. You want to get started with these short strokes so you can get the wood nice and smooth, knock down the bumps, any dirt that might be on it, and sand it off. Sometimes there's a stick, they put a sticker on it, you know, and after you peel it off, there's always some residue left behind. You want to make sure you get that off. 9 minutes to do that. So after you get it short stroked and you got it nice and you got it sanded where it's pretty smooth, then you change your face and you go end to end. Because when you short stroke it, you're gonna have scratches right here and here and here. And when you stain it, you don't want to see those scratches. You want to have one even line going back and forth so that it's part of the finish. So I just finish up from end to end. I go top to bottom, bottom to top, and then top to bottom. And this again is with 120. Now, I have it, it's pretty smooth. Feels really good. So now, I'm gonna finish it off by hand. And I'm gonna do it the same way. Now this is a little trick. I want you to watch this. You hold your hand, you put your palm out. You take the paper, here's the face, and you stick that right in your pinky, between your pinky and your ring finger. And then you wrap it around your palm. And then you tuck the end in under your middle finger. And now you have a hand pad. And so that's how I'm going to finish this, with a hand pad. Just like this. Watch it. Just back and forth, nice and easy. With the 220, it gets down in all the little grooves. This is perfect for when you want to do an antique. You don't want to use any kind of a block at all. You want to be able to move along with those undulations and get a light sanding. Now, this is a heavy sanding pretty much because it's new work. So now I'll take a vacuum and I'll vacuum this all up. Well, I hope you liked the video. Listen, if you liked it, please hit the like button. Consider subscribing. We're going to be going through a 5-part series of finishing. You know, today's video was about preparation and sanding. The next video will be on staining. There'll be a video after that on finishing. We're going to use a couple of different finishes on that same sample. And then after the finishing, we're going to do the rub out and the waxing. And then we'll have a discussion about just everything that we learned through that process. And so you're going to see a 5-part series coming up. I'm going to try to put these videos out every 2 or 3 days so that you can get the content all at once. So I want you to really be able to see how this gets put together, not have to wait 5 weeks for it to all happen. So I'm going to try to put it all together quickly so that you can see the result. And like I said, if you like the content, please subscribe. Okay? Thanks a lot. God bless.